The silence between gods is different from ordinary silence. It carries weight, history, the accumulated memory of battles fought and worlds saved. On this particular evening, three figures who had shaped the fate of existence itself sat together in a moment so rare it felt almost stolen from time. Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman gathered not as legends, not as symbols, but simply as friends. The weight of their mantles lay somewhere beyond the walls of this room, and for once they allowed themselves to breathe without the burden of heroism pressing down upon their shoulders. It was Tim Drake who had planted the seed of this game, though he was not present to witness its flowering. The rules were elegantly simple, yet they cut to the heart of identity itself. You cannot be who you are. Your powers are gone. The world no longer needs saving. Under these impossible conditions, what would you become? And here was the twist that made the game genuinely interesting. You do not answer for yourself. The others must guess on your behalf. Clark turned to Diana first, studying her face with those eyes that had seen the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. When he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that the world rarely witnessed, reserved for these moments when Superman could simply be Clark. He told her that he believed she would become a tour guide. Not just any guide, but someone who walked strangers through national parks and ancient museums, someone who showed ordinary people the humility that exists within time and nature. Diana would be the voice that reminded humanity of its smallness and its grandeur simultaneously, pointing toward mountain ranges that had stood for millions of years and artifacts that whispered secrets of forgotten empires. Diana received this vision of herself with a slight smile, that expression she wore when something unexpectedly touched her heart. She turned her attention to Bruce, and when she spoke, her words carried the certainty of someone who had known him through darkness and light alike. She saw him as a doctor, someone who saved lives in his own brooding, surgical way. The healing would happen in shadows, the gratitude would go unspoken, and Bruce would prefer it that way. He would fix what was broken in human bodies, the same way he tried to fix what was broken in human souls, methodically, relentlessly, never quite satisfied with the results. Bruce absorbed her words without visible reaction, but something shifted behind his eyes. Then it was his turn, and he looked directly at Clark with an intensity that suggested he had been waiting for this moment, that perhaps the entire game had been building toward what he was about to say. Without hesitation, without the slightest trace of humor, Bruce Wayne told Clark Kent that he would be president. Clark's response was immediate dismissal. He scoffed, waved his hand, tried to deflect with self-deprecation. He protested that Bruce could not be serious, that such a path had never crossed his mind, that if he could not be Superman or even a reporter, he honestly had no idea what he would become. But that particular role? That was not him. That could never be him. Bruce did not argue. He did not explain. He simply held Clark's gaze with the patience of a man who understood things about his friends that they had not yet discovered about themselves. The moment passed. The game concluded. Laughter returned to fill the space where deeper truths had briefly surfaced. But that moment, that seemingly innocent exchange about impossible futures, would echo through everything that followed. Because the universe has a way of testing the things we deny about ourselves, of forcing us to confront the identities we refuse to claim. The silence of that friendly game shattered like glass struck by a god's hammer. The tournament resumed, and this round carried a weight that transcended mere brutality. This was sacred ground, ancient beyond comprehension, terrible beyond imagination. Welcome to the graveyard of the elder gods. 32 champions had entered this phase of competition. Only half would emerge. Their battleground existed within a realm carved inside a microscopic white hole, a construction that had required 11 billion years to complete. Time moved differently here, flowing like light rather than water. Worlds were born and buried in the space between heartbeats. The rules of reality bent and twisted according to laws that predated the universe itself. The arena stood eternal, though no time had passed for the champions who found themselves transported to its impossible geometry. History had been etched into bones larger than mountains. The ruins of gods stretched toward a sky that had never known stars. Each moment forward promised war, and the architecture of this place had been designed to witness exactly that. Then the voice returned, and it was no longer merely a narrator observing from beyond the veil of existence. Now it spoke as the game master, as the heart of Apocalypse itself, the overseer of trials, the architect of final tests. The mission crystallized with terrible clarity. Darkseid had not merely conquered worlds during his reign of cosmic terror. He had devoured gods, consumed their essence, absorbed their power into himself. The corpses of those divine beings now littered this arena, their remains forming the very ground upon which the champion stood. Scattered within these sacred ruins were 16 relics, weapons of ultimate power that had survived the death of their original wielders. Some bore names that echoed through legend. Others had been forgotten by all but the most ancient memories. One remained a mystery, its nature and purpose unknown even to the game master. The rules were absolute in their simplicity. Only those champions holding a relic when the challenge concluded would survive to continue. Those who failed to claim an artifact would cease to exist, erased from the tournament and from the fabric of reality itself. There would be no rules of conduct, no limits imposed upon the methods of acquisition, no mercy extended to the fallen. The champions were instructed to follow the example of Darkseid himself, to embody his ruthlessness, to earn the rewards that awaited those who proved themselves worthy of power. The race began. The battlefield exploded with motion as heroes and villains scattered across the terrain of the dead gods. Instincts sharpened by years of combat guided some toward their destinations. Others relied on senses that transcended the physical, feeling the pull of specific relics, calling to them across the impossible distances. Hawkman heard his prize before he saw it. The claw of Horus sang to him through the magnetic heartbeat of the planet itself, a frequency that only one connected to his ancient lineage could perceive. He banked through the air, wings cutting through atmosphere that had never known the touch of mortal breath. Cyborg zeroed in on the mother box with mechanical precision, his systems already interfacing with its signal, the artifact speaking to him in languages of pure mathematics and divine computation. The box had been waiting for someone who could understand its true nature, and in Cyborg, it recognized a kindred spirit caught between worlds. But one man was already ahead of them all. Lex Luthor moved through the chaos with the calm certainty of someone who had anticipated every variable. His armor represented the pinnacle of human technological achievement, bristling with more scanners than 10 military satellites combined. Infrared arrays painted heat signatures across his display. Spectral analyzers identified energy frequencies invisible to lesser beings. Synthetic radar mapped every ruin, every corpse, every hidden chamber in real time. In a single second, Lex processed more data than most civilizations generated in a year. He identified the location of every relic, calculated the probability of successful acquisition for each, and selected his optimal target. The power rings called to him, promising control over the emotional spectrum itself, and he launched himself toward their resting place with the efficiency of a guided missile. That was when Clark saw him. The game evaporated from memory. The philosophical questions about identity and possibility faded into irrelevance. What remained was something older, something that had defined both men for years beyond counting. The rivalry blazed back to life with an intensity that surprised even Superman himself. If there was one thing that Clark Kent could not allow, one outcome that violated everything he believed about justice and the proper order of the universe, it was permitting Lex Luthor to win. Not here, not now, not when the stakes had grown to encompass existence itself. Clark rocketed after his nemesis, his passage creating shockwaves that slowed other champions in their paths. He froze villains who happened to cross his trajectory, barely registering them as obstacles rather than opponents. A mantra repeated itself in his mind, justifying everything, clarifying his purpose. This was why he had entered the tournament. Not for glory, not for power, not even for the protection of his own universe. He was here to stop them, all of them. but especially the bald genius in the armored suit who represented everything that could go wrong when brilliance existed without compassion. The battle began like lightning striking dry grass, fast and blinding and impossible to contain. Champions sprinted toward ancient power across every sector of the arena. Some followed instinct toward relics that resonated with their essential nature. Others executed plans they had formulated long before arriving, strategies built on research and preparation. None of them were prepared for the true chaos that was about to unfold. Because these relics were not simply tools to be wielded. They were game changers capable of rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. The blue beetle scarab pulsed with alien awareness, a living weapon that could adapt to any threat, creating cocoons and constructs and shields that surpassed even lantern technology. Its bearer would gain the ability to survive across dimensions, to travel through the bleed itself, to become something more than human while remaining anchored to mortal purpose. The Warlagog rested in its cradle of dead god bone, an artifact of myth that allowed its wielder to twist time and space according to their will. Reality became suggestion rather than law for those who held this prize. The Atom's Belt offered size manipulation beyond anything science had dreamed. Reduction to subatomic scales where the rules of physics became mere guidelines to be ignored. The Mother Box promised God-tier intelligence and matter manipulation, a direct connection to the source that powered all existence. The Medusa mask of the Psycho Pirate granted control over emotions on a massive scale, the ability to twist hearts and minds with a thought. Thor's hammer lay waiting for someone worthy, carrying within it the storm power of Asgard and the legacy of a god who had fallen in battles forgotten by mortal memory. Bane's venom offered brute strength incarnate, the chemical enhancement that had broken the bat and threatened nations. The Speed Force ring contained instant access to the power of gods who existed as motion itself, velocity beyond comprehension. The Genie pen tapped into the power of the fundamental force of existence that allowed reality to bend according to the will of its wielder. The Claw of Horus promised planetary punch force, strength tied to the magnetic core of worlds, power drawn from Hawkman's ancient and terrible lineage. The Soul Taker's sword waited with hungry patience, ready to trap the souls of its victims within its blade for eternity. The lasso of truth could not be broken and could not be deceived, pure honesty made manifest as golden rope. The Cosmic Rod offered interdimensional power and energy projection on a scale that dwarfed most weapons of war. And then there was the mystery item, unknown and unseen, potentially the most divine artifact of all, waiting for someone desperate or wise enough to seek it. Wonder Woman arrived at her destination first, her speed and determination carrying her past champions who had started closer to the prize. Her eyes locked onto the Atom's Belt, recognizing its potential, already planning how she would use its power. But the resting place had already become a battlefield. Jason Blood stood before her, though the man himself had retreated into the depths of his own consciousness. What faced Diana was pure demon, the rhyming wrath of hell made flesh, Etrigan in his full and terrible glory. The demon spoke in verse, as he always did, promising that the belt would not pass to the Amazon's hands, declaring his intention to kick her divine ass, acknowledging her might while prophesying her doom in this particular fight. Diana's response required no poetry. She told him to go to hell, her fists delivering the message with thunderous emphasis. She plowed through Etrigan like a storm breaking against a mountain, leaving him shattered in her wake as she began to search for her prize. But her victory was premature. A shadow fell across her path, and she turned to face Giganta, the size-shifting villain who had grown to her maximum proportions, towering above the Amazon with contemptuous confidence. Giganta announced that there was only room for one big girl in this challenge, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had never truly understood who she was threatening. Diana prepared to respond, to demonstrate why size alone could never defeat skill and divine heritage. Then a laugh echoed across the ruins, a sound that contained no sanity, no restraint, no connection to anything resembling human joy. A mountain-sized figure loomed behind Giganta, and a voice that should have belonged to a madman in a cell rather than a titan among gods asked a simple question. "You call that big?" Giganta barely had time to turn before she was crushed. The Joker had claimed the Atom's belt, and he had immediately inverted its purpose. Rather than shrinking, he had grown to skyscraper proportions, a cackling nightmare given flesh on a scale that defied comprehension. What happened next defied description, but it could not be ignored. The Joker consumed Giganta, his titan-sized mouth closing around her form, his laughter never ceasing even as he swallowed. The arena had witnessed countless atrocities in its 11 billion-year existence, but this particular moment of madness added something new to its collection of horrors. Across the battlefield, at the resting place of the God-Killer's sword, another brutal showdown erupted. Plastic Man faced Metamorpho in a confrontation between shapeshifters, two beings whose bodies defied conventional physics, two champions who could become anything they imagined. Plastic Man had prepared for this moment, coating himself in a super plastic compound that he believed to be indestructible. He boasted that nothing Metamorpho could create would dissolve his protection, that he had anticipated every possible chemical attack, that victory was assured through superior preparation. Metamorpho simply smiled, the expression of someone who understood chemistry at a molecular level. His response was brief but devastating. He pointed out that the one thing that could dissolve the superplastic was itself, a compound interacting with its own molecular structure under the right conditions. Then Metamorpho transformed into a boiling chemical reaction, his body becoming a living catalyst that triggered exactly the self-destruction he had described. Plastic Man melted from the inside out, his indestructible coating becoming the instrument of his dissolution. But before Metamorpho could claim the sword, a voice streaked past him, accompanied by a blur of motion that registered only as displaced air and distant laughter. Jay Garrick, the Flash of an earlier age, snatched the God-Killer sword and disappeared before anyone could react. He was already gone, already moving toward his next objective, already proving that speed remained the ultimate advantage in any competition. The chaos continued to evolve, and now the relics themselves began changing the nature of those who claimed them. In the ruins where the Speed Force ring rested, a surprise waited for any champion foolish enough to approach without caution. Guy Gardner descended from the sky with characteristic bravado, a Green Lantern who had never learned subtlety and never would. He announced his intention to claim the ring, boasting that a man could never have too many rings, already imagining the combination of lantern will and flash speed that would make him unstoppable. His fingers touched the artifact. Then a mallet connected with his skull with comedic brutality, the sound echoing across the dead landscape like a punchline to a joke only the universe understood. Harley Quinn's voice whispered from somewhere behind the impact, sweet and unhinged and delighted with herself. She announced that she was going to love this particular prize. And then she was gone, zooming away in blurred trails of red and black, now operating on flash time, but guided by Joker logic. The combination was terrifying in ways that pure speed could never achieve alone. Meanwhile, Superman caught up to Lex Luthor. This confrontation would prove to be the heart of everything that followed, perhaps the most important exchange the two men had ever shared. Clark hammered Lex into the ground with a fury that barely resembled the symbol of hope that humanity had come to worship. But Lex just grinned through the blood, unfazed by the physical punishment, his eyes carrying the calm certainty of someone who had already won. He told Clark that he was glad they had this moment together, that he wanted to express his gratitude for something Clark had done. The words made no sense. Clark kept his guard up, waiting for the trap, knowing that Lex never spoke without purpose. Lex continued, explaining that when Superman had thrown the entire Legion of Doom into the Phantom Zone, he had expected imprisonment. What he had received instead was something unexpected, a cosmic therapy couch where he could examine his life and beliefs without the distractions of conquest and revenge. He had used that time to think, to see everything from new perspectives. He had experienced an epiphany that had changed his understanding of himself and his enemy. Clark told him that he was not there to listen, that words would not save Lex from the justice that awaited him. Lex nodded, accepting the refusal while proceeding anyway. He produced a sword from his armor, jagged and glowing with an energy that Clark's cells immediately recognized and feared. Kryptonite came in many colors now, Lex explained. Purple drained life force directly. Black stole powers entirely. Red and pink created creative side effects that amused and horrified in equal measure. But this particular blade was something different, something forged from materials that existed in the Phantom Zone itself, designed not merely to hurt bodies, but to wound ideas. Lex swung. Clark's hand separated from his wrist. The Phantom Zone blade did not merely cut flesh. It severed the connection between Superman and the source of his power, created wounds that could not heal through yellow sun radiation, inflicted damage that transcended the physical. Clark screamed and fell, his body already betraying him as kryptonite poisoning began its terrible work. Lex leaned down, his voice cold and calm, finally delivering the truth he had discovered in his cosmic exile. He explained that he had always believed his hatred stemmed from Superman doing too much, from the alien robbing humanity of the growth that came through failure and struggle. But that understanding had been wrong, incomplete, a comfortable lie that had allowed Lex to justify his worst impulses. The truth was that Lex hated Clark because Superman did too little. Each word cut deeper than the blade had, reaching past the physical wound to something essential in Clark's self-conception. Superman never fixed anything, Lex continued. He held everything together and hoped that holding would be enough. He believed that hope itself could substitute for action, that inspiration could replace transformation. But the world did not need hope, Lex declared. The world needed change, real and permanent alteration of the systems that created suffering in the first place. And Superman was afraid to be the man who forced such change, afraid to use his power for anything beyond maintenance of a flawed status quo. That was why Lex would win. That was why he had brought a piece of the Phantom Zone into this arena just for Clark. Lex disappeared into the ruins, leaving Superman collapsed in dust and kryptonite, bleeding and broken, and for the first time in his existence, uncertain whether his enemy might be right. Back on the battlefield, the madness continued to evolve beyond any possibility of control. Giganta was already dead, crushed and consumed by a Joker who had grown to Titan proportions through the Atom's belt. But in true Joker fashion, her death was merely the opening act of something far worse. The clown towered above the arena, laughing through teeth the size of automobiles. He stomped and smashed and taunted the champions below, treating the sacred competition as nothing more than an elaborate joke with a punchline only he could appreciate. But the chaos refused to remain focused on any single threat. Starro the Conqueror arrived at the ruins where the God-Killer's sword had rested, a massive sentient starfish with psychic control abilities and regeneration that defied conventional harm. The creature lunged toward where it sensed power, only to find the prize already claimed. Jay Garrick was there and gone before Starro could process his presence, the Golden Age Flash moving at speeds that made light seem stationary. He offered a quip about having arrived yesterday, already disappearing toward his next destination, while Starro screeched in frustration behind him. Guy Gardner, still recovering from Harley's assault, spotted something glinting beneath a pile of shattered godbones. The claw of Horus pulsed with magnetic energy, calling to anyone attuned to its frequency. He rushed forward, desperate to claim something after losing the Speed Force ring. But Hawkman descended from above, guided by his ancient connection to the artifact. He grabbed the claw and rocketed away before Guy could close the distance, leaving the Lantern stumbling and cursing his continued misfortune. Elsewhere, the Mother Box pulsed with divine light, and Cyborg found it waiting for him like a lover anticipating reunion. He whispered to it, asked it to speak with him, to share its secrets. As his hand made contact, the box fused into his systems with willing eagerness. His eyes flared with power that transcended anything he had experienced before. Data flooded his consciousness, information from the source itself, knowledge that rewrote his understanding of existence. He was no longer merely man and machine. He had become a child of the Source, upgraded beyond all previous limitations. Across the field, Swamp Thing reached for the Soul Taker's sword, believing that it belonged to the green, to the force of nature that he embodied. But others had designs on the same prize. Andrana, a mystic warrior with power drawn from dimensions beyond mortal comprehension, stepped forward to challenge his claim. Then Lobo arrived, and subtlety ceased to exist as a concept. The main man announced his contempt for what he called magic hippies, simultaneously revealing his own prize. Bane's venom coursed into his veins, his already formidable muscles swelling to monstrous proportions. But Starro attacked again, having recovered from Jay Garrick's humiliation, determined to claim something from this round of competition. Lobo dismissed the creature, pointing out its apparent lack of musculature. Starro corrected this misconception with disturbing enthusiasm, explaining that starfish were composed almost entirely of muscle tissue, that the creature was, in its own words, jacked. They clashed with violence that shook the ruins around them, but Lobo's venom-enhanced strength proved superior. He tore Starro apart, ripping the creature into fragments that scattered across the battlefield. This proved to be a catastrophic mistake, because starfish regenerate, and each piece of Starro grew into a new clone, a new vessel for the hive mind's psychic control. Within moments, 1,000 mini-Starros began spreading across the arena, latching onto champions, possessing them, turning allies into enemies and enemies into puppets. The infection spread like wildfire through the competition. Supergirl fell under Starro's control and immediately grabbed the Psycho Pirate's mask, her possessed mind seeing opportunity in the emotion-manipulating artifact. Aquaman succumbed next, claiming the cosmic rod while his consciousness retreated beneath the starfish's psychic dominance. Flash was redirected to intercept Black Lightning before the electrical hero could reach the Whirligog. Wonder Woman, now under Starro's influence, charged towards Zatanna with murderous intent, determined to prevent the sorceress from claiming Thor's hammer. But Zatanna stood her ground, her training in the mystical arts providing defenses that even alien mind control could not easily penetrate. She spoke to Diana, but not to the possessed version that attacked her. Her words were directed at something deeper, at the true Wonder Woman trapped beneath Starro's control. The possessed Diana snarled that Zatanna was already hers, that resistance was pointless. Zatanna smiled, explaining that she had not been speaking to the parasite. She whispered to Thor's hammer, which lay nearby, and she spoke Diana's name, telling her to reach down at that precise moment. Something in Wonder Woman heard. Something in her divine heritage responded to the call of another god's weapon. Diana's hand closed around Mjolnir. Lightning exploded from a sky that had never known storms, crashing through the arena with divine fury. Thunder rolled across the graveyard of elder gods, and Diana rose transformed, worthy of a power that had waited eons for someone to claim it. The surge of divine lightning fried every possessed champion simultaneously. Starro's network of control collapsed as its clones burned to ash. The battlefield fell silent for one crystalline moment, marked only by the echo of thunder and the crackle of dispersing energy. Starro was defeated. The plague had been cleansed, but the focus of danger shifted to a new predator, one who did not require size to be terrifying. Because while others fought like gods, the Joker had changed tactics. The Atom's belt allowed manipulation in both directions, and now the madman had shrunk himself beyond visibility, a microscopic nightmare dancing between atoms, impossible to target and impossible to predict. He reappeared inside someone's skull. Big Barda screamed. New god, former Fury, a warrior who had experienced every variety of pain that Apocalypse could devise. Yet as the Joker tore through the tissue of her brain from within, she cried out that she had not felt agony like this since her training under Granny Goodness. Meanwhile, Jason Todd entered the arena with purpose burning in his eyes. The Red Hood locked onto the blue Beetle Scarab and claimed it before any other champion could interfere. Blue light surrounded him as the alien armor bonded to his body, a fusion of bat training and extraterrestrial technology that created something uniquely dangerous. He spotted the Joker through the Scarab's enhanced senses, detecting the clown's microscopic form through technology that had been designed to perceive threats across dimensional barriers. Red Hood announced that he had a punchline of his own prepared. He fired a barrage of energy blasts, weapons configured to target something smaller than bacteria. But the Joker, even at that scale, proved impossible to pin down. He slipped between molecules, bouncing through matter itself, his laughter echoing from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Elsewhere, King Shark crashed through a field of shattered bones, his massive form creating tremors as he charged toward a glowing relic. Vixen blocked his path, the animal channeling hero standing firm against a predator that outweighed her by tons. King Shark demanded that she move, dismissing her as a snack rather than a threat. He declared himself the apex predator, the top of the food chain, insisting that her powers over animals could not matter against a great white shark. But Vixen smiled with the confidence of someone who understood powers that King Shark had never imagined. She explained that she channeled the spirit of all life, including creatures from places that modern science had never documented, including the ancient terrors that had swum the seas of Dinosaur Island. Her aura transformed around her, taking the shape of something from prehistory, something that made King Shark look like a minnow by comparison. A megalodon manifested around her form, a prehistoric titan far older and far hungrier than any modern shark could comprehend. She pounced, and King Shark never stood a chance. Then the battlefield warped in a way that suggested reality itself had noticed what was happening, because someone had found the most dangerous item of all. The genie pen rested in Shazam's hand, and as his fingers closed around it, he spoke the word that activated its power. Is. Reality trembled at the sound of its own fundamental force being invoked by mortal lips. The genie pen tapped into the raw force of creation itself, the power that allowed existence to exist, the authority to rewrite rules that had governed the cosmos since its birth. In that moment, Shazam transcended his previous limitations entirely. He was no longer merely a man granted the strength of gods. He had become a god with the imagination of a man who understood exactly how the universe worked. Across the battlefield, Zatanna found herself approaching another prize, the Soul Taker's sword that had been the focus of such violent competition. But she was not alone in her approach. The Legion of Doom was converging from multiple directions, drawn by the same prize, ready to fight for possession. And from behind them, Lex Luthor returned. He moved with the calm of someone who had already won, someone who viewed the remaining conflict as mere formality. He held one item that had not been on anyone's list of expected relics. Zatanna froze as she recognized the Black Lantern ring on his finger. She stammered that he could not use that particular artifact, that its power required the presence of the dead to function. Lex smiled with cold certainty and asked if she was truly sure about that assumption. Then he raised his hand, and the Black Lantern ring pulsed with the accumulated hunger of death itself. He pointed out what Zatanna had missed in her assessment. She had been looking around her, at the champions and the ruins and the relics. She had not been looking down, because beneath this arena, buried in its very foundations, lay the corpses of beings that the ring would find very interesting indeed. The Elder Gods. Long ago, Darkseid had butchered them to seize their power. He had consumed their essence and used their remains to construct this very battlefield. Their bodies had become the graveyard itself. And now Lex was calling them back. A thunderous quake split the land open. The sky darkened with energies that had not been witnessed since before the universe took its current form. From the pits that connected this place to Apocalypse rose beings not seen since the birth of time. Dead gods reanimated, fueled by Omega energy that had been trapped in their bones, commanded by the Black Lantern's absolute authority over death. One by one, they ascended, towering and grotesque and ancient beyond any measurement that mortal minds could comprehend. Lex did not flinch at the monsters he had summoned. He was not frightened of them. He was commanding them. Superman lay dying in the dust, still bleeding from his phantom wound. Kryptonite shards still embedded in his chest where no healing could reach them. He heard the undead gods before he saw them, felt their approach through vibrations in the ground that his fading senses could barely detect. His body refused to respond to his commands. His lungs struggled for each breath. His heart fought to maintain its rhythm against the poison coursing through his system. But his mind raced with desperate speed, trying to find some solution, some path forward that did not end in darkness. He felt what was coming. He understood the scope of what Lex had achieved, and he whispered the terrible truth to himself. Lex had won. The undead titans swept across the field with the inevitability of extinction events. They crushed champions like insects. These beings who had seemed so powerful moments before now revealed as nothing compared to the risen dead. Supergirl, wielding the Medusa mask, was snapped in half by a god whose skin flowed like molten metal. Black Lightning was erased from existence before he could reach the Warlogog, his electrical powers meaningless against creatures that had died before electricity had meaning. Aquaman vanished beneath the crushing maw of a three-headed serpent god that had once ruled oceans on worlds long since burned to cinders. Through it all, Lex walked calmly across the battlefield, never running, never looking away from Superman. He was walking toward his fallen enemy, and nothing in the universe seemed capable of stopping him. In Clark's fading consciousness, memories surfaced unbidden. The game, the quiet moment, Tim Drake's question about impossible identities. He remembered Lois asking him to answer properly after the others had made their guesses. He remembered struggling to articulate what he might become if he could not be who he was. Maybe a fireman, he had said. Someone who ran into danger when others ran away. He remembered Bruce speaking about leadership, about the mathematics of heroism, about how Clark always calculated the path that helped the most people. That was not politics, Bruce had insisted. That was something purer, something Clark embodied without trying. Then Bruce had added the warning that Clark had not wanted to hear. His math always worked, Bruce had said, until it did not. And now, lying in dust and kryptonite and the certainty of defeat, Clark finally understood. A line from the Game Master echoed through his memory. Follow the example of Darkseid, and you shall be rewarded. What had Darkseid done to achieve his power? He had sacrificed. He had given up his life, his original form, his limitations. He had died to become something more. And somewhere in this field, there remained one item that no one had claimed. The mystery artifact. Clark's eyes found it through the haze of pain and poison. It pulsed with familiar energy, with power he recognized from his darkest nightmares. The Omega Sanction, the very essence of Darkseid himself. Power that had destroyed timelines, shattered souls, rewritten existence according to its wielder's will. A punishment designed for gods. And now, perhaps, a final chance. Clark reached for the shard of kryptonite still embedded in his shoulder. His hand trembled with exhaustion and agony. His nerves screamed protests that his will ignored. He gripped the glowing green death and pulled. The pain was beyond description, beyond any reference point he possessed. But he did not stop, because with his final ounce of strength, Superman chose to end himself. He sacrificed the form that had defined him. He released the limits that had contained him. He surrendered the hope that had always been his foundation. He died. And then the Omega Sanction answered. The mystery item activated in response to his sacrifice, recognizing the gesture that its original master had made so long ago. A flash of burning black and searing violet consumed what remained of Clark Kent. Energy beyond measurement erupted from the ground where he had fallen. And standing in his place rose something else. Still Superman in some essential way. Still Clark Kent at the core of his being. But more, transformed, evolved beyond the limitations that had once defined him. Stronger than he had ever been. Colder than he had ever allowed himself to become. Balanced between destruction and justice in a way that terrified even the undead gods. A new god had been born from the death of an old hero. A dark one. Omega Superman opened eyes that burned with black fire and surveyed the battlefield with perfect clarity. Lex saw the transformation, and, for the first time in his life, hesitated. The Elder Gods received their first true threat since Darkseid himself had slaughtered them. They lunged toward this reborn Kal-El. These titans, who had crushed champions moments before. Omega Superman decimated them. Every punch echoed like a supernova, being born and dying in the same instant. Every blast tore through cosmic flesh that had survived eons. He did not hold back. He did not hesitate. He did not offer mercy. He became what Darkseid had once been, not a destroyer of worlds, but their judgment. Not a conqueror, but an ending for things that needed to end. Lex screamed in rage at seeing his victory dissolving before his eyes. Omega Superman turned toward his enemy, eyes burning with power that had once belonged to the Lord of Apocalypse. He told Lex that his scheme had failed, that the battle was over. He raised his hand to deliver the final blow, to end the rivalry that had defined both their lives. But before the strike could land, a voice cut through time itself. The Game Master spoke with absolute authority. The challenge was complete. All relics had been claimed. Those without items were eliminated. Those with items would proceed. Lex collapsed to the ground, breathing hard, blood covering his face. Still alive, saved by the rules of the game. He grinned through bloody teeth and promised that they would see each other in the next round, addressing Clark as old friend with a mockery that only he could make sound sincere. The battlefield fell still. The gods lay dead again, truly dead this time, their remains scattered across ruins that had watched too many apocalypses. The voice returned with cold announcement of results. The second challenge was complete. 16 champions remained. The rest had been eliminated from existence. Light dimmed across the arena. Relics glowed in the hands of their victors. Some champions blinked in confusion, uncertain how they had survived. Most stood covered in blood, some of it their own, most of it belonging to the fallen. Each of them had been changed by what they had experienced. Because this was no longer a game. This had become something else entirely.